Have you ever felt judged the moment you walked into a room? Eleanor Monroe had. And by the time she walked out of that bank, she made sure they all regretted it. The glass doors of Halston Federal Bank slid open with a quiet whoosh as Eleanor stepped inside. It had already been an exhausting day. A marathon of conference calls, back-to-back negotiations, and critical board meetings had left her brain running on fumes. All she wanted now was to make a straightforward withdrawal of $50,000 in cash, funds earmarked for an upcoming investment opportunity. Nothing unusual, nothing complicated. She adjusted her sleeveless ivory blouse, brushed a hand through her naturally curly hair, and exhaled quietly as she approached the teller line. The bank was relatively empty. A few customers here and there, a middle-aged man filling out deposit slips by the window, an elderly woman chatting softly with a young teller near the far wall. A security guard leaned lazily against the far corner, arms crossed, his gaze drifting without much interest. Everything about this should have been routine. Eleanor had been banking here for over a decade. Her firm, Monroe Equity Partners, maintained multiple high-value accounts with Halston Federal, totaling over $20 million in deposits. She had a spotless track record, no overdrafts, no questionable transactions. She was by every metric an exemplary client. And yet, the moment she stepped up to the counter, she could already sense something was off. The teller, a woman in her mid-50s with a rigid posture and a pair of sharp, rectangular glasses, looked Eleanor over in a way that wasn't subtle. The forced smile that followed was tight, almost patronizing. "How can I help you today?" the woman asked in a tone that was more formality than warmth. Eleanor offered a polite nod, placing her gold-embossed business debit card and photo ID on the counter with practiced ease. "I need to make a withdrawal," she said. $50,000 in cash from my business account." The teller blinked slowly. There was a beat of hesitation before she spoke again. "You want to withdraw? How much?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her patience already thinning after the exhausting day she'd had. "50,000, she repeated calmly. "From my business account. It's all there. Shouldn't take long." The teller's lips pressed into an even thinner line. "One moment," she murmured, fingers hovering uncertainly over her keyboard. Eleanor exhaled quietly as she watched the woman begin typing. But she caught it immediately, the subtle shift in the woman's expression, the slight frown. It was the look bank employees gave when they thought something didn't add up. A minute passed, then two, and still, the teller was staring at her screen as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Is there a problem?" Eleanor asked, keeping her tone even. The teller glanced up, hesitating. "I just need to verify some information." And then, without another word, the woman stood up and walked away, disappearing into an office behind the counter. Eleanor tapped her manicured nails against the glass surface, a slow, steady rhythm. Across the room, the security guard had straightened up. He was watching her now, with more focus than necessary. She knew exactly what this was. They weren't verifying anything. They were profiling her. But Eleanor Monroe didn't let things slide. Not when she'd spent her entire career proving people wrong about who they thought she was. For minutes ticked by. No sign of the teller. No explanation. Just whispers behind the counter and sideways glances in her direction. Her jaw tightened as she checked the time on her watch. Enough. She looked around. The young man in a hoodie who'd been waiting had just withdrawn cash and left with a crisp, white envelope in hand. The elderly woman at the far counter was smiling as she deposited a check. No fuss, no delays. It was just Eleanor standing there, waiting, watched. She felt a presence. The security guard had moved closer, now standing only a few feet away. His hands were clasped in front of him, his gaze fixed on her with something between suspicion and anticipation. Eleanor inhaled slowly, calming herself. Then she turned to a younger teller, a man with close-cropped dark hair, who had just finished assisting another customer. "Excuse me," she called out to him. He startled slightly. "Yes, ma'am." She gestured toward the office where the first teller had vanished. "I've been waiting for a while. Can you tell me what the holdup is?" The young teller shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing. I believe she just needed to confirm something with management. Confirm what? Eleanor asked. My account is in order. My ID and banking card are right there. What is there to confirm? He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the first teller reappeared. She was walking briskly toward the counter, trailed by a man in an ill-fitting suit who moved with the self-importance of someone who liked hearing themselves speak. The man stopped beside the counter and folded his arms. Miss Monroe, he began, his tone overly formal. I'm Garrett Langley, the branch manager here. I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal. Eleanor didn't flinch. That's correct, she said evenly. $50,000 from my business account. Langley tilted his head, regarding her as though she'd just claimed to be royalty. And this withdrawal is for... Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. What is the purpose of this withdrawal? For a brief moment, Eleanor was stunned. Then she let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Since when do customers have to justify withdrawing their own funds? Langley gave a tight, controlled smile. Large cash withdrawals can trigger certain protocols. We need to ensure there's no suspicious activity. Eleanor's stomach clenched. She had read about this happening to people like her, watched the viral videos, heard the stories. Now she was living it. Garrett, she said quietly, let's not waste time. I've banked here for years. I've made withdrawals before. I've never been questioned like this. Langley sighed, as if the whole thing was an inconvenience to him. It's just procedure, Miss Monroe. We need to verify a few things. Eleanor crossed her arms. Then verify them. But do it quickly. He nodded toward the teller. Run a fraud check on the account. Eleanor stiffened. A fraud check? She repeated coldly. For what reason? The teller didn't answer. She simply turned back to her computer and began typing furiously. The security guard took another step closer. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She took a deep breath, remaining still, projecting the calm of someone who knew exactly what power they held. How long will this take? She asked, her tone sharp. Just a moment, ma'am, the teller murmured without looking up. Eleanor didn't move. She'd faced tougher boardrooms. She dismantled entire corporations and built a fortune from nothing. She wasn't about to let these people rattle her. But when the teller suddenly froze, her hands hovering over the keyboard, Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Langley peered over her shoulder, and Eleanor noticed the flicker of discomfort. What is it? She demanded. Langley straightened. There's a discrepancy. Eleanor laughed again, this time with less amusement. Be specific. Your withdrawal request has been flagged as potentially fraudulent, he said flatly. We'll need further verification. Eleanor's jaw tensed. You're accusing me of fraud. On my own account. Miss Monroe, the teller said quickly. We're just following security protocols. No, Eleanor cut in. You're profiling me. The room grew quiet. Other customers were watching now. A mother holding a toddler. An older gentleman near the exit. Eleanor's voice was steady but lethal. Tell me, Garrett, she said, if I look a little different, maybe if I walked in here wearing a suit and tie, would we be having this conversation? Langley's lips pressed together. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? She replied. Langley exchanged a glance with the guard, then turned back. We need you to step aside while we make some calls. Eleanor stared at him. Step aside, she repeated softly. She glanced down at her bank card, still sitting there untouched. Slowly, she picked it up and slipped it back into her wallet. Then she reached for her phone. You just made a huge mistake, she told him. Because Eleanor Monroe wasn't just any client. She was the client. Her fingers moved quickly across her phone screen. The call rang twice. Marcus, she said when her corporate attorney picked up, get on the line with Halston Federal's regional office. Now, what's going on? He asked. They're refusing to release my funds, she said coolly. Suddenly, I'm a fraud risk. There was a beat of silence. Then Marcus exhaled sharply. Say no more. Stay put. Eleanor ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse. She smiled at Langley. That was my attorney. He's about to have a very interesting conversation with your bosses. Langley's confidence cracked. The teller's hands trembled slightly. A few minutes later, Langley's desk phone rang. He picked it up with stiff, reluctant fingers. "This is Langley," he said. Silence. Then his expression changed. "Yes, sir," he said finally. "I understand." He hung up slowly, then looked at Eleanor. His face was pale. "Miss Monroe," he said stiffly. "I apologize for the misunderstanding." Eleanor tapped her nail on the counter. "A misunderstanding," she repeated. "That's what we're calling it." Langley flushed. "Your fund will be released immediately. If you'd like, we can offer you a private room while we finalize." "Oh," Eleanor cut in. "Now you want to offer me privacy?" He had no response. She stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice low. "You're going to process my withdrawal. Then I'm closing every account I have with this bank." Langley's eyes widened. "Miss Monroe, please." She cut him off again. "Do you know how much my firm has deposited here in the last 5 years?" He said nothing. $20 million, she answered herself. "And you just lost every penny of it." The teller flinched. The security guard looked away. Eleanor stepped back, adjusting her bag over her shoulder. "Now, give me my money." The withdrawal was processed in silence. Eleanor counted every bill slowly and methodically, while everyone watched. Then she smiled coldly. "Looks right." Langley tried one last time. "Miss Monroe, there's nothing you can say to fix this," she told him. "But you better think twice about how you treat people next time. Not everyone can fight back. But when they can't," she trailed off. "That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." And with that, Eleanor turned toward the doors, money in hand. But her phone buzzed again. "Marcus." She answered. "Lisa," he said. "The regional director wants to speak with you directly." She smiled. "Put him through." The damage control had officially begun. And by the time she left that bank, Eleanor Monroe had made sure they would never forget her name. What about you? What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? Have you ever experienced something like this? Let's talk in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life lessons that hit hard.